Welcome to Stories from the Front. Take a second to like, subscribe, and activate notifications. The skies over London still carry the echoes of that summer in 1940. Edward Eddie Collins, as I was known in the RAF, today at the age of 98 still hears the familiar buzz of the Spitfires cutting through the clouds. The Battle of Britain wasn't just a fight for survival. It was our last line between civilization and chaos. I'll never forget the day I received my assignment to the 242nd Squadron. I was a young 23-year-old pilot, a recent graduate and full of patriotic ideals. Commander Stanford greeted me with a stern look and words that I carried with me throughout the war. "Collins, there's no place for lone heroes here. We're a family, and families protect each other." Our base in Duxford was a whirlwind of constant activity. The mechanics worked tirelessly on our Hurricanes, magnificent machines that, along with the Spitfires, were our main hope against the German bombers. The smell of aviation fuel and engine oil permeated everything. But for us it was the perfume of survival. My first real combat flight came sooner than I expected. The alarm sounded at 5:30 in the morning. The piercing sound of the sirens made my heart race as we rushed to our aircraft. I remember looking at my wingman, Robert "Bobby" Mitchell, who gave me that characteristic nod of his. Bobby would become my best friend and mentor over the following months. We took off in formation, our engines roaring against the still dark sky. The radar controller guided us with his calm voice over the radio. "Bandits approaching Dover, height 15,000 feet, heading northwest." It was a formation of Heinkel T-111s, escorted by Messerschmitt Bf-109s. The first time I saw the German bombers appearing through the clouds was a moment I'll never forget. They were like metallic predators, their wings black against the morning sky. The squadron commander gave the order, "Attack the bombers. Watch out for the escort." Air combat is unlike anything you can imagine. It's not like in the movies with long dramatic chases. There are crucial seconds of decision, instinctive maneuvers, and silent prayers. In that first meeting, I learned that war in the air is as much about preservation as it is about destruction. Bobby taught me the technique that has saved my life countless times. Never fly in a straight line for more than 15 seconds. Be unpredictable, but keep your eyes on the whole sky. It was a deadly ballet at 20,000 feet, where every move had to be calculated and precise. Our first joint victory came that morning. A Heinkel was targeting the Dover shipyards when Bobby distracted it from the front, allowing me to position myself for an attack from below. The bursts from my 8 Browning machine guns found their target. I saw the German bomber shudder, one of its wings on fire. The crew managed to parachute out, and that brought me a strange relief. We were enemies, but there was a tacit understanding between airmen. Today me, tomorrow you. Returning to base always brought mixed feelings. The adrenaline was still coursing through our veins as we debriefed. Some familiar faces didn't return that day. Lieutenant Harrison, who had taught me to play chess the night before, was among them. The war was beginning to show its true face. The following weeks became a blur of alarms, takeoffs, and fighting. We slept fully dressed, ready to rush to our planes at any moment. Tiredness piled up, but a sense of duty kept us alert. Every German aircraft we stopped from reaching London meant civilians saved, homes preserved, families intact. Our preparation room had a giant map of the south coast of England, covered in markings and planned lines of attack. There, we planned our interceptions and discussed tactics. Commander Stanford always said, "Knowledge is as important as fuel. Without it, you won't get far." But not all the planning in the world could prepare us for the intensity of what was to come. The Luftwaffe was stepping up its attacks, and we, the few as Churchill would later call us, were all that stood between them and our country. The pressure was enormous, but there was also a sense of purpose that united us stronger than any blood tie. The battle was just beginning, and those first days were just a prelude to what fate had in store for us. The summer of 1940 would be long, and each dawn would bring new challenges, new losses, and sometimes small victories that would keep the flame of hope burning in our hearts. As August progressed, the intensity of the German attacks increased exponentially. One day in particular remains etched in my memory. August 15th, 1940. The Luftwaffe launched its biggest offensive yet, with hundreds of bombers and fighters crossing the English Channel in successive waves. Bobby and I were playing cards in the rest room when the alert sounded. It was different this time. The radar operator seemed more tense than usual as he transmitted the coordinates. Massive force approaching, over 100 aircraft in multiple formations. We exchanged quick glances before running to our hurricanes. The sky was different that morning. The German formations seemed endless, filling the horizon like a swarm of metallic wasps. Our squadron took off in perfect formation, but we soon found ourselves separated by the sheer number of enemy aircraft. The battle turned into dozens of individual duels, a deadly dance at 20,000 feet. That was the day I lost Bobby for a few critical moments. A Messerschmitt Bf 109 emerged from the clouds, its machine gun spitting fire. I performed a desperate maneuver that Commander Stanford always warned against. A full loop at maximum speed. My Hurricane protested, the structure groaning under the G-force, but the maneuver worked. When I emerged, I was perfectly positioned behind the German fighter. Air combat has a strange beauty in the midst of chaos. The vapor trails intertwined in the blue sky, forming ephemeral patterns that disappeared as quickly as they appeared. The sound of the Rolls-Royce Merlin engines of our fighters mixed with the roar of the German DB-601s, creating a mechanical symphony of war. During that battle, I witnessed something that would change my perspective forever. A German pilot, whose bomber I had hit, managed to make an emergency landing in a nearby field. Hours later, when we returned to base, I learned that he had been captured and brought in for interrogation. What surprised me was finding him in the canteen, sharing a cup of tea with our pilots. Hans was his name, and he was only 22. "We are all aviators," he said in hesitant English. "The sky knows no borders." The nights at the base became increasingly tense. After each mission, we counted those who didn't return. The blackboard in the briefing room, where we listed losses and victories, became a silent memorial. Each name erased represented not just a lost pilot, but dreams and futures that would never come true. Commander Stanford kept our morale high with his calm leadership. "Gentlemen," he would say during briefings, "every minute we keep those bombers away from London is a victory. Every civilian we save is a battle won." His words gave us the strength to carry on, even when tiredness threatened to overwhelm us. The mechanics worked miracles every day. Our Hurricanes came back riddled with bullets, with damage that seemed impossible to repair. But somehow, the next morning, they were ready for another mission. Chief Williams, our chief mechanic, used to say that each plane had its own personality. "This one," he used to say, patting the fuselage of my Hurricane affectionately, "is stubborn like you, Collins. It refuses to stay down." One of the most valuable lessons I learned in those days was the importance of camaraderie. We weren't just a squad, we were a family. We shared not only the danger, but also the small joys. A letter from home, a packet of chocolates, a joke over breakfast. These little normalities kept us human in the midst of the madness of war. The routine became more and more intense. 3 for sometimes 5 missions a day. The time between flights was filled with quick maintenance, refueling, and hurried briefings. We slept when we could, where we could. Many of us started dreaming of dogfights, waking up suddenly with our hands instinctively searching for the non-existent controls. Bobby developed the system of hand signals that we used during combat when the radio failed or was jammed. A wave to the left meant imminent danger. 2 taps on the head indicated problems with the engine. It was our secret language in the skies, and more than once it saved our lives. The weight of responsibility was immense. Every decision made thousands of feet in the air could mean the difference between life and death, not just for us, but for the civilians on the ground who depended on our protection. The war had aged us quickly, turning young pilots into veterans in a matter of weeks. September brought with it a change in German strategy. The Luftwaffe began to concentrate its attacks on London, abandoning attempts to destroy our air bases. It was a mistake that would end up costing Hitler dearly, but at that moment, it represented a new nightmare for us RAF pilots. On a particularly tense afternoon, I received a mission that would change my perspective on the war. Commander Stanford called me aside. "Collins, I need you to lead a formation of 4 aircraft. Bobby's in hospital." My heart froze. Bobby had been hit on a previous mission, but managed to land his Hurricane in flames. He survived, but would be out of action for weeks. The responsibility of leading other pilots weighed on my shoulders like lead. Among them was Peter Williams, a 19-year-old rookie who reminded me painfully of myself a few months earlier. His youth and enthusiasm contrasted dramatically with the hardened gazes of the veterans. The mission began like so many others. The alert, the rush to the planes, the takeoff and formation. But something was different in the air. The German bombers were coming in a more dispersed formation than usual, a tactic we hadn't encountered before. "Red leader to squadron, stay close," I instructed over the radio, remembering Bobby's teachings. Young Peter was on my right wing, his wings occasionally reflecting the sunlight. We spotted the He-111s first, flying towards the heart of London. What followed was one of the most intense combats I've ever experienced. The Messerschmitts emerged from the clouds like hawks, diving over our formation. Peter reacted instinctively, executing a defensive maneuver that saved him by inches. "Good dodge, Red 4, I praised, trying to keep my voice calm. Our formation split into individual duels. Through the windshield of my Hurricane, I saw London below, already scarred by sporadic fires. Every bomb we let through meant more destruction, more lives lost. This awareness pushed us beyond tiredness, beyond fear. One of the most surreal moments of that day was when our combat took us over the Thames. The sun's reflections on the water created a spectacle of light that contrasted grotesquely with the violence around us. I saw Peter win his first victory, a bomber that crashed into the river after his accurate blast. But war takes its toll. We lost James Morrison that afternoon, a veteran who had survived the entire campaign so far. His Hurricane simply disappeared in a cloud of black smoke. There was no shouting on the radio, no drama, just silence. The kind of silence that haunts your dreams forever. The return to base was marked by a mixture of exhaustion and relief. Peter was overjoyed with his first victory, but I could see in his eyes the same look we all developed after our first kill. A mixture of pride and guilty conscience. In the briefing room, Commander Stanford welcomed us with his usual composure. "Well done, gentlemen, especially you, Collins. Bobby would be proud." Those words meant more than any medal could. I visited Bobby in hospital that night. His face was bandaged, but his spirit remained unshaken. "What was it like leading the boys?" he asked with a crooked smile. I told him about Peter, about the mission, about Morrison. He listened in silence, nodding occasionally. "You know, Eddie," he finally said, "the real battle isn't against the Germans. It's against ourselves, against fear, against tiredness, against the temptation to give up." His words echoed in my mind all the way back to base. The days that followed brought more fighting, more losses, more small and costly victories. Each time we took off, we carried with us not only ammunition and fuel, but also the memories of those we had lost and the determination to honor their sacrifice. The war changed us day after day, mission after mission. We were no longer the same young men who had joined the RAF with dreams of glory. We were men who knew the true cost of freedom, measured in lives, sweat, and unshed tears. Autumn arrived, bringing with it not only the golden leaves, but also a change in the air war. The Germans, frustrated with their losses, began to carry out more night attacks. This new tactic forced us to adapt our own strategies, and the nights became as dangerous as the days. Bobby had returned to duty, although he still bore the scars of his last confrontation. His first mission after recovery was memorable, not for the fighting, but for what happened before takeoff. I found him kneeling beside his Hurricane, gently touching the fuselage. "Chatting to old friends," he said when he saw me, with an embarrassed smile. A particularly challenging night began with the familiar sound of alerts. The moon was full, providing sufficient visibility for combat, but also making us easier targets. Peter, now a more experienced pilot, was leading his own section. Seeing his growth filled me with an almost paternal pride. The radar detected a large formation of bombers approaching Liverpool. The city had already suffered devastating attacks, and each new attack increased our determination to protect it. We took off in less than ideal conditions, with low cloud hampering our formation. Night combat was a completely different experience. The tracers cut through the darkness like threads of fire, creating a deadly, beautiful spectacle. Identifying friend or foe became even more crucial. An error of judgment could be fatal. During that mission, I witnessed something I will never forget. One of our Hurricanes, piloted by Sergeant Davies, was hit. Instead of abandoning the aircraft, he deliberately collided with a German bomber heading for the city. His sacrifice saved hundreds of lives on the ground, but the price was too high. Commander Stanford gathered the squadron together the next morning for a special briefing. His normally firm voice trembled slightly as he spoke about Davies. "Gentlemen, yesterday we lost more than a pilot. We lost a hero, but his sacrifice will not be in vain." I watched Peter discreetly wiping his eyes. Davies had been his instructor. Night missions required even greater concentration. We developed new signals with flashlights and learned to trust our instincts more. Bobby used to say that a good pilot could sense the presence of the enemy before he even saw them. I began to understand what he meant. Our base had changed too. The mechanics worked in constant shifts, adapting our Hurricanes for better nighttime performance. Chief Williams spent days developing a new camouflage system that reduced the glare from our engine's exhaust. One night, after a particularly difficult mission, I found a letter waiting on my bunk. It was from Hans, the German pilot we had captured months earlier. He was in a prison camp in Canada and wrote to thank us for the humane treatment he had received. His letter made me reflect on how war changes us all, regardless of which side we fight for. Autumn was advancing, and with it came a growing sense that we were beginning to turn the tide. The German attacks, although still dangerous, seemed less coordinated. Our confidence grew with each successful interception, with each bomber forced to return without completing its mission. Bobby and I developed a new tactic for night fighting that was soon adopted by the whole squadron. It consisted of using the clouds as cover, only emerging at the last moment to attack. It was risky but effective. Commander Stanford nicknamed it the Phantom of the Night. Evenings at the base became moments of deep reflection. We sat in a circle in the briefing room, sharing stories and fears. Peter once confessed that he wrote a letter to his mother before every night mission. "It's not superstition," he explained, "it's just precaution." We all understood perfectly. The winter of 1940 arrived with a ferocity that rivaled the war itself. Night missions had become our new normal, but nothing prepared us for what we would face in December. The Luftwaffe, determined to break the British spirit before Christmas, stepped up its bombing raids over London. Bobby and I were discussing tactics when Peter burst into the briefing room. "London is on fire," he said, panting. "The city is being devastated." Commander Stanford immediately called the entire squadron together. For the first time, I saw real fear in his experienced eyes. The scene we found as we took off was apocalyptic. The London skyline glowed with a sickly orange hue as hundreds of fires consumed the city. Black smoke rose in grotesque spirals, forming a curtain that made it difficult to see. "Keep close formation," I ordered over the radio, trying to keep my voice steady. The battle that followed was unlike anything we had ever faced. The German bombers, protected by darkness and smoke, appeared like ghosts through the clouds. Bobby developed an improvised tactic. We used the glow of the fires below to identify the enemy silhouettes against the dark sky. Peter proved his worth that night. His Hurricane danced between the tracers as if it were part of the air itself. I saw him shoot down 2 Heinkels in quick succession, maneuvers that would have made his old instructor, Davies, proud. But war takes its toll. Moments later, his radio abruptly went silent. The initial panic was replaced by relief when we spotted his parachute descending gently over the Thames. Peter had managed to jump, but his Hurricane, faithful to the end, plunged into the dark waters of the river. He would later tell us about the terrifying seconds in which he struggled to free himself from the burning cabin. Our base had become a makeshift hospital. The mechanics not only repaired aircraft, but also helped to care for the wounded. Chief Williams, with his calloused hands that normally fixed engines, now applied bandages with surprising delicacy. It was during one of these endless evenings that Bobby shared something that would change my perspective forever. "You know, Eddie," he said as we watched the distant fires, "we're not just defending buildings and streets. We're protecting memories, dreams, futures that haven't been lived yet." Commander Stanford implemented a new rotation system to combat exhaustion. Teams of 4 pilots took turns in 6-hour shifts, allowing some rest between missions. But sleep, when it came, was filled with nightmares of night battles and burning cities. One particularly difficult night brought an unexpected revelation. During combat over the East End, I identified a German bomber with familiar markings. It was from the same unit as Hans, the pilot who had written to us from Canada. For a brief moment, the war seemed even more absurd. Christmas was approaching, and with it came a subtle change in troop morale. Letters from home arrived more frequently, bringing news of distant families and loved ones. Peter received a package from his mother containing a hand-woven scarf. He wore it on every mission, considering it his lucky charm. The war had taught us valuable lessons about humanity and sacrifice. Each pilot lost left a void that couldn't be filled, but it also strengthened our resolve. Commander Stanford kept a diary with the names of all the men we had lost, not as statistics, but as a reminder of their sacrifice. Bobby developed a ritual before each night mission. He would touch the fuselage of his Hurricane 3 times and whisper something he never shared with anyone. Some considered it superstition, but I understood. In times of war, we clung to any shred of hope or comfort we could find. As December progressed, we noticed a gradual change in the pattern of enemy attacks. The Luftwaffe was beginning to show signs of wear and tear, its pilots as exhausted as we were. The battle for London's survival was far from over, but we were beginning to glimpse a light at the end of that long tunnel of darkness. The transition from 1940 to 1941 marked a significant change in the Battle of Britain. The Luftwaffe's attacks began to diminish, not for lack of determination, but because of the inevitable wear and tear that the war imposed on both sides. Even so, we remained vigilant, knowing that every moment of calm could just be preparation for the next storm. Bobby and I took part in our last mission together in January 1941. The day began like so many others, but there was something different in the air. Commander Stanford called us together for a special briefing. We had received information about a last-ditch coordinated attempt by the Luftwaffe to hit the London docks. Peter, now a respected veteran, was leading his own section. The insecure young man I had met months before had turned into a born leader. His lucky scarf, a gift from his mother, still adorned his neck on every mission, although it was now stained with oil and worn by time. The takeoff was silent, each pilot immersed in his own thoughts. The winter sky was exceptionally clear, allowing visibility we hadn't experienced for a long time. Bobby was flying on my left wing, his presence as familiar as my own breathing. The fighting that followed was intense but different. The German pilots seemed less aggressive, more cautious. Our accumulated experience allowed us to predict their movements, anticipate their tactics. Chief Williams had spent the previous night fine-tuning our Hurricanes, and his modifications proved their worth during the clash. One particular scene from that day remains vivid in my memory. Bobby executing a perfect maneuver to protect a young pilot who had overexposed himself. It was like watching a master teach his craft one last time. "I still have a few tricks up my sleeve," he said over the radio, his characteristic humor intact even in the most tense moments. Commander Stanford surprised us by personally leading an attack against a formation of Heinkels. It was rare to see him in direct combat, but that day he wanted to be at his men's side. His leadership inspired all of us to do our best. We returned to base with the feeling that something had fundamentally changed. It wasn't just another victory, it was the harbinger of the end of an era. The debriefing was longer than usual, with each pilot sharing his observations on the changes in the enemy's behavior. Peter took that moment to announce that he had been transferred to train new pilots. His knowledge and experience would be invaluable to the next generation of defenders of British skies. The pride on his face as he received the compliments of his colleagues was evident. Bobby and I spent that evening reminiscing about our journey. Sitting in the rest room, cups of cold tea in hand, we shared memories of friends lost, battles fought, lessons learned. "You know, Eddie," he said, "I think we've done something important here. Something that will be remembered." Chief Williams presented us with small pieces of metal from the aircraft we had flown. "Souvenirs from your metal buddies," as he called them. That simple gesture perfectly captured the special bond between pilots and machines that developed during the battle. Over the next few weeks, the intensity of the fighting gradually decreased. The Luftwaffe redirected its resources to other fronts, and we began to process everything we had experienced. Commander Stanford started the tradition of weekly meetings where we shared our experiences, ensuring that the lessons learned would not be forgotten. Today, so many decades later, I still carry that piece of metal from my hurricane with me. It reminds me not only of the battles and victories, but above all of the extraordinary men with whom I had the privilege of serving. Bobby, Peter, Commander Stanford, Chief Williams. Each of them contributed to the defense of our nation in ways that go beyond the official statistics. The Battle of Britain changed us in ways we could never have imagined. We weren't just pilots defending our country. We were guardians of a future that others could build in peace. And although the price was high, the legacy of those few lives on, inspiring new generations to defend the values we fought for. Now, at the age of 98, I share the story not just as a historical record, but as a testament to the human spirit, so that future generations will understand that the freedom they enjoy was won in the skies of England by ordinary men who did extraordinary things.